Hey everyone, I'm Laura Lee Siemens. Welcome back, and we are back into Daniel. We're doing our Bible study in Daniel, and we are on Daniel chapter 11. So I'm going to let you know the first time that I did a Bible study on Daniel and went through the whole book. Daniel chapter 11 is where I stopped and gave up, because as I was reading it, I just okay, I'm done. There was some complicated stuff up till Daniel 11. When I got to Daniel 11, I just had no idea what they were talking about, and I gave up. But when I went back later, a few years later, and went through it, got a little bit of a better idea of what it was about, kind of made it through, but still wasn't quite grasping it. However, over the last couple of years, I've really spent a lot of time studying history, and actually there's a lot of really interesting history that is in Daniel chapter 11. So I'm going to give you a super quick version of this chapter, and then I'm going to go into a little bit more detail and explain it a little bit more before you start reading it. Now, a lot of times if you go on YouTube and look at videos of Daniel, they make things a lot more complicated than they need to be. Or maybe the videos are made more for people who are really interested in prophecy. So they go into a lot of details. They get into a lot of different parts of the Bible. They explain a lot of things. And if you really want to do a deep dive into Daniel, there's a lot of great videos. But what I'm trying to do here with this video series is just give you a basic idea of what the verse is about or what the chapter is about before you jump in to read it. So I tried to keep all the videos really short and simple and just a basic explanation, so then you can go ahead and read it and study for yourself, because I think that that's what you should do, is study the Bible for yourself. This video is going to be a little bit longer because, well, one, Daniel chapter 11 is really long. There is 45 verses, so it's longer, and it covers a lot. So basically, Daniel chapter 11, really, it covers the history of all of the time between the Old and the New Testament. So that's pretty cool, actually, when you think about it. So we're going to go through this. So what it starts with, beginning of Daniel chapter 11, it's the angel who's talking from chapter 10. Whether that is an angel or whether that is Jesus, we talked about that yesterday. So remember that Daniel was sad because Ezra was now rebuilding the temple. The Jewish people, the 70 years was up, they've returned, but he's not able to return because one, he's in his 80s, two, he's also very high up in government. So for multiple reasons, Daniel isn't able to go back. So obviously he's really sad about that, because over his whole life, even though he has served in multiple governments, served the Babylonians under 2 kings, he served the Medes and Persians. We see this is the year of Cyrus. He's also with King Darius or Darius. And so he has done all this. He's still stayed true to being Jewish and to his faith in God. So obviously he's sad that he's not able to return. So he was sad about that. So he's praying, and then he was praying for 3 weeks. And then he sees this man at the river who is either an angel or is Jesus, depending on how you interpret that. And then he says that he tried to come the first day that he prayed, but he was battling the Prince of Persia, which is demonic forces, and then Michael, who is the warring angel for Israel, came and helped him. And so now he's here. So now he's going to, so chapter 11 is the angel talking to Daniel and explaining to him what he came to tell him. All right, so it starts off when it says, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. So that is not Daniel talking there, that is the angel. And he's talking about what he was doing, that he was actually standing up. And remember that he was putting Darius in charge. So the world leaders, even the world leaders that we aren't initially fond of, you need to remember that God is always in control, right? So what he basically explains here is that what's going to happen is there's going to be 3 more Persian kings who are going to come and control over Israel. And then there's going to be a 4th one who's going to be the richest and most powerful one. And that is actually the one in the story of Queen Esther. And then there's going to be a new ruler. It's going to be a Greek ruler. And he's going to come. He's going to be very powerful, but he is going to die suddenly, and then his offspring is going to be handed off to 4 people who are not his descendants. So we know, obviously, if you paid attention during the study, that that's Alexander the Great and his 4 generals. So then there's going to be, then he goes on for a really long time talking about the north and the south, kingdoms of the north and the south. And so that is Egypt and Babylon, but Babylon now is named Syria at that point. So that's Egypt and Syria. He talks about that for like forever, for a very, very long time. And then he wraps up with a king who's going to come from the north, which is Syria, and how absolutely horrid he is going to be. So that is a really quick sum up. So now we're going to get into a little bit more detail. So I have a lot of notes here. So we're going to go through this, and I'm going to try to make it as quick and as interesting as possible. All right. So after Alexander the Great dies, he divides, his kingdom gets divided up amongst his 4 generals. So it's divided, Egypt, the Babylon area, which is named Syria at this point, and then Turkey and Greece. So that is the 4 kingdoms. They're divided up. So Egypt and Syria do not get along. So some versions of the Bible call them the north and the south. Some versions will actually say Egypt and Syria, which I like better because I get north and south mixed up. It's just one of my things I'm not good at. There's not, their names aren't mentioned. The reason for this is because it's not one story. It's like hundreds of years of history. So it goes back and forth. And if you look at history, they all have the same names. It's like this person the second, this person the third. This is crazy. So it's actually easier how God wrote it. It just is the king of the north, the king of the south. Or as some versions say, king of Egypt, the king of Syria. So I'm going to go through these. So first it starts off with the king of Egypt and Syria. They make a deal. Oh, another important thing to understand is that if you look at a map, so Egypt and Syria are fighting for these hundreds of years, and Israel's right in the middle. So during all of this fighting, Israel is, they're kind of running their own stuff and doing their own thing, but they are still technically owned, like ruled by Syria. So Syria is in charge of them, but they are in their own homeland. So all this fighting is going on, and Israel's just like stuck in the middle. Okay, so the first thing that happens is the kingdoms of Egypt and Syria make a pact, and they do it through marriage. So the king of Egypt gives his daughter to the king of Syria. So just to make this easier, if you're like a person who learns by seeing, we're just going to do this every time. King of Egypt, and then this is the king of Syria. Okay? So the king of Egypt, he gives his daughter to the king of Syria to get married. One problem is that the king of Syria is already married. So the king of Syria divorces his wife so he can marry the daughter of the king of Egypt. So she comes over and she gets married to the king of Syria. Now, that obviously makes the ex-wife not very happy about that because she wants her son to be the ruler of Syria. So the king of Egypt dies, and so then the king of Syria is like, oh, I don't really need to be married to your daughter anymore. So then he gets rid of her, and he decides he's going to go back to his ex-wife. She's actually still kind of bitter. So she ends up killing the Egyptian daughter, who's now married to is the ex-wife of the Syrian king. She kills the ex-wife, the first ex-wife, kills the Egyptian princess and her son and all of her servants, and also poisons the king as well. So now there is nobody ruling in Syria. So then the original ex-wife's son takes over and rules Syria. So quick sum up. This guy's like, hey, marry my daughter and we can be friends. And this guy says, okay, but I have an ex-wife, so I'm going to dump her. So then he comes over, they get married. Then this guy dies. Syria's like, yeah, I don't really need your daughter anymore. I'm all done with you. I'm going to go back with my ex-wife. And the ex-wife is like, yeah, I'm going to kill you and that little Egyptian girl and her child. And then my son's going to rule. So that's what happens there. So then obviously Syria and Egypt are in don't like each other for a very long time, hundreds of years after that happens. Okay, so now time passes, and the Egyptian king has a new ruler, and he is somehow related to the Egyptian princess that got killed like a long time ago. Because many years happen in between each of these stories as you're reading. So this new Egyptian king, he says like, hey, I'm going to go and avenge the death of my cousin, maybe, we're not really sure. I'm going to go avenge her death, and I'm going to go against the Syrians because we really should own Syria, because it should have been like my cousin's son that's ruling Syria. And so our family should be ruling Syria, not your family. So the Egyptian goes over there and attacks the Syrians, and he wins, and then he takes a bunch of stuff from their temple. Okay? So he doesn't really get anything from that battle except like yeah, we're better than you, and I'm taking a bunch of stuff from your temple. All right, so lots of times pass. So then a new king of Syria, so many more years have passed, new king of Syria says, well, I'm going to go attack Egypt because I'm still mad at them for attacking us a long time ago. So the king of Syria goes back, evades Egypt, and loses, so Egypt is still winning. So Egypt has won all these battles. All right, a long time passes again, and Syria attacks Egypt again. This time Syria has a massive army. So they're like, wow, look how huge our army is. We're going to win for sure. But Egypt wins again. And they decide to kill 10,000 people after they win. So they're all like, wow, we're amazing. But they get no land out of it. So all that happens is lots of people die. All right. So then Syria ends up building up its army and makes a massive army. So during that time, Israel is still stuck in the middle, right? So there's some Israelites, and they decide, you know what? Egypt keeps attacking Syria and winning. We should attack Syria, and then we can gain our independence. So the Israelites attacked Syria. Not all of them, though, just a few. And they say that they saw a vision that told them to attack Israel. So they go and they to attack Syria. So the Israelites who saw this vision go attack Syria, but they lose. All right, so now Syria, which was basically leaving Israel alone, now they're like, wow, they're attacking us. So now it's a little bit more tricky. Okay, at that point, Egypt just kind of moves on with their lives. It's been a couple hundred years since the Egyptian princess died. And so they just give up attacking Syria. But Syria continues to control the promised land and has power over it. So then we're at this point, we are at verse 17. So all of that has happened in the first 17 verses. So at this point, the Syrian king gets an idea that he's going to give his teenage daughter to the Egyptians to marry a prince. So they're trying it again, but this time it's the Syrian giving their daughter to the Egyptians. So after all these years, they still think that the marriage idea will work. So he hands his teenage daughter over to the Egyptians to get married. And her name was Cleopatra, but she's Cleopatra the First. So the Cleopatra we know about and have plays about and read, and there's movies and everything, is Cleopatra the Seventh. So this is Cleopatra the First. This is the first Cleo. Okay, so she is supposed to go to Egypt, gain power, and then eventually have the Syrians be able to come over and take Egypt. So that is her job. She goes to Egypt, she gets married, and she says, you know what, actually, I think I'm going to align with the Romans. So just a different person altogether. I'm just going to go with the Romans, not Egypt or the Syrians. So she begins working with the Romans, and that makes the Syrians not very happy. So they don't want to attack Egypt because that's where their daughter is. So they begin attacking Rome. And they have these big battles at sea against Rome. And Rome ends up winning. And after Rome wins, they say, well, we're either going to take your land or you have to pay us back for all of the money we spent on this war. So now Syria has massive war debts, not only from their war, but they also have to pay Rome's war debt. So they have to pay for all of their things that they lost during the war and build up their army again. And they also have to pay Rome for all the money Rome spent on the war. So the Syrian king decides he is going to basically start stealing from his people in order to get money to pay off the war. So he is literally stabbed in the back with a knife and killed. So a new king comes. The new king says, well, we'll pay off all this debt we have to Rome with raising taxes. So he raises taxes really high. He also goes over to Israel and goes into their temple and tries to take things from their temple that he can give to the Romans as payment. But the priests run the Syrians out of the temple and nothing is taken. So he tries to raise taxes, and that king dies suddenly, and so that doesn't happen. Okay, so now we are moving up even farther. We're getting closer to the end here, but at this time we need to see is that the nation of Judah is really divided politically. So there's one group that wants to be Greek. So you think of it as like the liberals and the conservatives. So the liberal Jewish people, they want to be Greek, they speak Greek, they give their children Greek names, they follow the Greek gods, and they just, they want to move forward and they want to be more Greek and more like the rest of the world. So this group is called the Hellenes. And then the other group, which would be the more conservative group, they want to stay Jewish. They want to continue worshiping God. They give their children Jewish names. They know how to speak Greek, but they're trying to keep the Hebrew language. So at this point, there's a new Syrian leader who comes, and it is Antiochus. And I know I'm not saying it right. I'm not good at pronouncing names. But this is the same guy I learned about in chapter 8. So remember when there was the goat and the ram, and the ram had two horns, one was bigger than the other, and that was the Medes and Persians. And then remember the goat came, ran really fast, trampled over him, how he had, then he had a big horn that was cut off suddenly. And then there was the four horns, so that was Alexander the Great and his four generals. And then there was this little horn that grew up and it was crazy. And how some people say that that's the Antichrist. Some people say that it was Antiochus, and I say I think it's both, because Antiochus did all of the things that they say the little horn was going to do, but also I think it was a picture of the Antichrist because he's going to do similar things. I think both can fit there. Okay, so here's Antiochus. This is when he comes into power. So he becomes king by actually tricking the Syrians. So he's not next in line to be king. He's not supposed to be king. His brother is supposed to be king, but his brother is being held in a Roman prison. So Antiochus says, I'm not going to be king. I'm just going to come. I'm going to take over and run the government and try to get my brother back. And then when my brother comes back, we'll be able to hand over Syria and then to my brother to rule. And if we don't have anyone ruling, then the country will fall apart and there'll be nothing for my brother to rule. So he tricks people. He's a very sweet talker, really good at tricking people. So he says that's what he's going to do, but he completely abandons his brother in the Roman prison, does nothing to bring him back, and takes over Syria. Okay, so then Antiochus begins killing anyone who speaks out against him. So one of the people who speaks out against him is actually one of the high priests in Israel. So Antiochus has him killed as well. But he is a sweet talker and he makes lots of peace treaties. And what he does is, instead of just going after the big countries, all the little countries around, he just starts making peace treaties with all of them, getting them all to be his friends. And then that's how he grows and his power grows, because he ends up taking kind of control of all these little places. All right, so then he goes up and he fights against Egypt. And the Egyptian king is actually sabotaged by his own advisor. So then Antiochus wins that battle. So then the two, so then the two kings, Egyptian king and Syrian king, which is Antiochus, they come together for like a meal, but it's like a treaty meal, right? So they're coming together to figure things out, but they're both lying. And neither of them are actually planning on doing the treaty, so it obviously doesn't work and it all falls apart. So Antiochus is traveling back to Syria and he passes through Judah. And as he's passing through Judah, there's like this anger in his heart that builds up. not even necessarily towards the Jewish people, but towards their religion, which means it's towards God. So he sees some of what they are doing in their religious practice as Jews, as Judaism, and he has this absolute hatred towards the Jewish faith. So he decides he really wants to do something about that. So that's the growing in his heart. All right, so then Antiochus, he attacks Egypt again. But this time when he attacks Egypt, the Romans show up kind of to protect Egypt. And so Antiochus ends up just running away in fear, and he's completely humiliated because he has to retreat. So he's angry, he's humiliated, and as he's retreating, he's going through Judah again. And when he sees this, all his rage and anger gets built up, and he just decides, that's it. Like, I hate this, I hate the religious sect of the Jewish people, and so I need to do something right now. Instead of emphasizing on Egypt, he kind of turns all of his rage in on Judah, but specifically on the Jewish people who are still practicing their faith. So what he does is he meets with the Hellenist people. So the Jewish people who are more liberal and more Greek, he meets with them to figure out how he could end the practices of the Jewish people. So what they tell him is that it's about the temple. So he has to get rid of the temple, and he has to make the temple unclean. So he goes in and he puts a statue of Zeus in the temple, and he sacrifices a pig in the temple. So if you know about Judaism, it's very strict on what happens. And this is the temple of God. So you can't have a false god in the temple of God. And they sacrifice a perfect lamb. That is actually an example of Jesus, because Jesus is the perfect lamb. Jesus said, I am the lamb. And he is called the Lamb of God. So they're sacrificing a pig, which is, Jewish people weren't even allowed to eat pig. That was completely unclean. So in like multiple ways, he has absolutely defiled the temple. You cannot worship God in there anymore, because the temple's supposed to be holy, set apart, and now it's not, so it can't be used for worship anymore. Then after that, he says there can be no more sacrifices to God, only sacrifices to Zeus. And he really wages war on them. So if they go against him, they are killed. If he finds out that they did do any kind of sacrifice, or if they celebrate or the Sabbath, they're actually burned alive. So really bad. He robs them, he imprisons them. He actually ends up just completely destroying Jerusalem. There's no reading scriptures, no Jewish celebrations, no circumcision, and he uses the temple for drinking parties and prostitution. So then he makes himself God, and he ignores the gods of his fathers. And it says in the King James that he doesn't, it makes it sound like he doesn't love women, because it says he doesn't love, it says he doesn't love women, but what it's saying there is he doesn't love the God that women were looking towards, and that is actually the Messiah. So the hope of women was that they would be the one chosen to be the mother of the Messiah. So there, some people will say, oh, this means that he liked men, but that's not actually what it's saying. It's saying even that Jesus, who didn't even exist yet, he hated him. So he says there's no other gods greater than him. So there's a 3-day war, and in 3 days he kills 40,000 people, including women and children, and he takes 40,000 women as slaves. So 80,000 in 3 days gone from Judah, and those would be the religious people. So at that point, Judah Maccabee says, that's it, I've had enough. He fights back, and there's 3 years of fighting, and after those 3 years of fighting, the Syrian and Antiochus is defeated, and Israel, or Judah, has its independence. And it was independent, that's 129 BC, and it keeps its independence until 63 BC when Rome invades. So from 129 until 63, the Jewish people have independence. And that is Hanukkah. So they go in, now they want to take the temple, and they want to cleanse the temple from Zeus and the prostitutes and the pigs and the killing people. Like, they threw women off of the temple to their death if they circumcised their children. Like, lots of horrible things happen. So they go in to purify it, but they only have enough oil for 1 day for the purification, and it needs to last for 8 days. But God performs a miracle, and the oil lasts for 8 days. And so we still celebrate, or Jewish people still celebrate Hanukkah, and Christians should really as well. That is Hanukkah. So what happens to the king? The Jews believe that God strikes him with an invisible blow. History says he dies of this horrible disease where his bowels basically stop working, and he dies. So that is Daniel chapter 11. See, it's not that bad, right? Totally fine. So as you go through and read this, just remember you're listening to lots of different stories, hundreds of years, basically covers the time almost up until the point of Jesus, but it's the middle between the Old Testament and the New Testament. All right, we have 1 chapter left. I'm Laura Lee Siemens. This is the Daniel Bible Study, and we just survived Daniel chapter 11.